There's an irony in having multiple passions and interests and still not knowing what to show up and post online in order to build a personal brand that encompasses you and leads to the opportunities that you actually want. Actually, it can be kind of painful when you think about it. The issue is that you have no structure, no source document, no continuous reference point to draw from when it comes to sourcing ideas that further the goals that you have for your brand, but ultimately your life, because that's really what we're talking about here. And the reason I know this so well is because I've been on this journey to 250,000 across platforms now. Sounds lovely, the community, the opportunities, the income, but I had to wade through all these interests that I have and making sense of them and actually being able to consistently show up in a way that drives my goals and my vision. So I'm going to show you how I solve for this problem today in my own life, but also the people that I work with by showcasing the blueprint and specifically through the app that I've built that allows you to find an infinite source of ideas for your personal brand that link to the goals that we have. And you're definitely going to want to stick around to the end because I'm going to share some of the inputs that you might want to consider if this is something that you want to get started with. So let's just get into it. But we're actually gonna need to move into my office and my desk because we're gonna get into the nitty-gritties. So we're currently in the MPP app, and what you can see specifically here is actually an example blueprint. That is something that somebody would be using that have generated their source document to know what it is they're posting, what their positioning is, and the framing of the work that they're creating, all again in line with that vision that they have. So let's go through this, break it down, why the things exist, and then specifically how you could use this to generate infinite ideas. So at the top of the blueprint, you actually have your Renaissance formula. Now, if you're new here, you might not be familiar with my positioning formula, but it's effectively how multi-passionate people can bring together the elements of themselves that make sense to fulfill the goals that they have. So it's usually when you bring a skill together, something you have proven ability in, something that you have a passion in. So that's in this case, the personal branding, the skill is engineering, your energy, which in this case is clear and direct, like how do you show up? And then your values, your principles that guide you. Freedom and community are used in this particular example, right? And that's like an anchoring point for you. And it does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of thinking about what it is that you want to be known for, what you want to bring together. Now, the next thing that follows that formula is your mission statement. Now, the reason why the mission statement is important because the formula is a set of elements that come together. But in terms of articulating it is what the mission of our brand is, and therefore what it is that we'll be posting about, how we'll be positioning ourselves. This is why a mission statement can be so powerful. In this case, I help multi-passionate professionals turn their full range into a clear personal brand, body of work, and real opportunities, right? And I actually have like a full statement in what I've built here, but that's just the headline. And it can be very important for you to reference, but also when you're articulating to others what it is that you're doing here, what it is that you're actually trying to achieve. Next, we have the vision. So the vision summary, to be specific. Now, the reason why this is so important is because, like I said, your personal brand is actually there to help facilitate the vision you have for your life in several elements. In this case, it comes under work. So what you're building towards in terms of how you want to work, your business, your career, development, so who you're growing into, right? And also impact, who you want to serve. And so having the vision embedded in this particular document and this source document is really key again for understanding that if what I'm going to be talking about, what I'm going to be sharing in video format on YouTube, in written format on LinkedIn, whatever the case is, serves this vision. If we just point out a few bits from this particular example, we have, you want to operate where technology, creativity, and human development intersect, right? Long term, you're building an ecosystem, Renko, that supports multi-passionate professionals at scale, right? And we'll talk about how you actually get all this information into something like this later on, but I just want to showcase to you like what this looks like and why it's so powerful. Next, we have your positioning. So this is where we dive into what makes you different, right? What makes you stand out? Why you amongst the sea of people that exist? Right? And this is another place where it can be quite powerful, this document, remembering what it is that you should be leaning into to ensure that you're actually driving, again, a personal brand that is going to be unique to you and that only you can really stand behind. That doesn't mean like reinventing the wheel all the time, because like we're pulling from like known practices when it comes to personal branding, positioning, mission statement, but we're actually finding the ways that are unique for you to show up in this space. So for example, in this blueprint, we have engineering grade systems thinking, because this is based partly on me, right? And the fact that I'm a senior engineer, but also I'm a proven creator and educator. I have almost over 250,000 now of people across platforms. These are things that make me different and they're part of my positioning and what I might want to lean into and even points that I want to draw out in my content when we talk about later. And then you can start to see I have a section about specifically the gap that I fill. But we start to see again another powerful part of this blueprint that allows you to ground what it is that you are going to be speaking about. Then we have something very powerful, which is your kind of audience mapping, your target audience section. And in this case, what you can see is something called the 4D profile. So this is where your audience at a glance, like if we had to sample your audience, what might they look like in terms of their demographics, right? Their descriptors, so how they would describe themselves, their desires, their dreads. Now, this is important because personal branding can seem quite abstract. At the end of the day, it's getting in front of people. So it's important to know who it is that you're speaking to. I've drawn out some things like age, location, career, education in terms of the demographics. Descriptors are things like ambitious, capable, multi-passionate, multidisciplinary. Some of those desires, right? We have things like a clear answer to what do you do that doesn't erase parts of her, right? Or a non-linear career path, dreads. So that's actually fears because I want it to be 4D. That's why we have that. But like you say, wasting my potential, it's a fear. So you're starting to see that I actually now have a rich idea of who it is that I actually am speaking to in this brand. And again, the content ideas that we're going to draw from here. Now, when you're thinking about this particular profile and what that looks like, I want you to remember that often you are speaking to a younger version of yourself or a version of yourself from a few months ago, years ago, whatever the case is. That's usually some of the most powerful personal brands. We take this a level further in this particular blueprint and actually create example profiles. So yes, at a high level, we have all of this information, but what might one of these people look like, right? The capable but split. She's in a solid tech career, like she's good at what she does, yada, yada, yada. But outside work, she's constantly saving ideas, starting side projects, consuming career and personal branding content, but none of it feels like it adds up. Probably some of you will feel like you fit into that profile. But now I can also pull out what your struggles are specifically, like her brain is loud, too many interests, too many options, she's second guessing herself. She can't articulate, right, a cohesive direction. What she's tried, like the profile starts to get quite deep. And I think you could probably already start to think about how all of this is potential content and going into that list of ideas that we have. Taking a step further in the profile, what she's tried that hasn't worked. Maybe she's tried copying specialist advice, like pick one niche. Again, we're starting to think about how all of this is an infinite supply almost of content. And what makes her say, this is exactly for me? That's an important thing to think about when you're thinking about the audience that you want to speak to, right? What would make them connect with what you're saying? Something that's actually quite cool about what I've built here, and that's kind of side note, but it actually has an integration where the whole thing is built with AI, but also you can edit with AI. So if there's a particular section and you're like, I actually think part of these descriptors are not quite right, or like they need updating, boom, you go in here and you just edit that with AI, like, you know, back and forth and use their brain as well as yours in like a collaboration sense, which can be very, very powerful. But anywho, let us move on, because after the audience mapping and the 4D profile, we have key messaging. Now, your key messaging is what you want people to kind of almost start to remember you for or associate you with, right? It's the things that if they were describing the work that you do, the personal brand that you've built, the opportunities that you're right for, what was coming out in the post, it's probably going to be your key messages. So one of the examples is your multiple passions aren't the problem, the lack of structure is. Now, because this is partly based on me as an example, you'll almost recognize that if you've been on my channel or seen any of my content as a key messaging that goes through and that is present in some of the content that I make, right? But we could keep going through this. In this case, we have five of these. So those are your key messages that can start to form a through line between the work that you're doing and the post that you're making. And again, if you always have this reference point and you're thinking back and you've carved out your key messaging, maybe you have 6 key messages like it's here, then you can think, does the content that I'm making or the plan that I have for this particular piece of content serve some of this key messaging or reinforce that messaging, right? You can even start to think about the particular language that you want to be associated with when you're making this content, when you're building your body of work. In this case, multi-passionate professional, frameworks, body of work, ecosystem, but I'm avoiding things like just pick a niche or post daily, right? Things that seem like the antithesis of what it is that I want to stand for. Now, going in a bit further, we actually can draw out the content pillars in this particular blueprint as well. And there's 5 here. 3 to 5 is usually what's recommended so that you have enough to pull from, that it's not like becoming, repetitive, overly repetitive, because some repetition is important, but also not so chaotic that there's nothing here. Do you know what I mean? So in this case, we have a few content pillars that serve this mission statement, that serve what everything we've said, the audience that we've been building towards. And I'll pick up one of these, like multi-passionate careers. So in the case of what I built here, we have a description. So non-linear career design, portfolio careers, integrating multiple interests without sounding messy. Things that you've probably even seen on my channel, right? We've probably seen some videos like this. But the content pillars, because they come after some of that work we've done before, we have things like understanding the audience connection. So if we went back to those dreads, you're going to see them come out here. Like the reason why we picked this, choosing the wrong path was one of those fears, right? Wasting potential was one of those, not knowing how to explain oneself, right? Those are the audience connections and why this pillar even makes sense and why we should be making content around this particular pillar. You can even see the formula elements that it links to as well. And how this builds your positioning. How does this particular content pillar build the whole positioning that we're going for? reinforces the whole idea of being built for non-linear people. It's not generic advice about one niche. How does it activate the message? Well, it activates that the non-linear doesn't mean unprofessional, it means modern. When we're speaking about those key messages. And the vision, again, how does it link back to your vision and your mission? Moves you towards being a leading voice in the multi-passionate careers and building a Renko-style ecosystem at scale. I actually just think, like, thinking about how putting all of this into a single document, into a single blueprint, can help free up your brain and form a reference point that you can keep going back to is really key. Now, the final part is your signature frameworks and your intellectual property. Now, this is where we take it a step further effectively and think about how the frameworks that you have are actually your intellectual property. We give names to it and things of that nature. And so your IP is like one of the final parts that we come through here in terms of the blueprint. Mine here is the Renaissance formula. It's the formula I actually told you about at the beginning that I've been working on for years, and I've used it with myself, with the people that I work with. I've told you guys about it for a while now. I was at my event. But your IP can be incredibly strong for not only driving ideas, but actually carving out your space. So I'm aware that might seem like a lot of information, but I really wanted to showcase to you at a high level what a blueprint that has been well thought out can do and how it can alleviate this constant decision fatigue about what am I thinking about next? What am I doing next? Does it actually serve the goals I have? Is it going to actually lead me to getting the results that I want, the opportunities that I want? This is what the blueprint solves for. Now, what you're looking at is part of the MPP program app that I have. So it's right that I share with you that the next cohort is going to be starting very soon and there are a few spaces left. So if you're interested in building all of this out, so all the work that goes into the background and actually using this, delivering and actually executing on this in terms of building your body of work across YouTube and LinkedIn, the key ones for professional opportunities like speaking, career, clients, things of that nature, and you want to work with me to kind of carve out this leadership positioning, then go ahead and click the link in the description where you can book in a call and we can see if we're right for each other. But anywho, let's get back to it. Now let's get back to this because I did say that I was going to show you how you get a almost infinite supply of ideas for posting that link back to your personal brand. Now we're going to get at least 10 from different parts of this blueprint just to illustrate this, and you'll see that there's way more that we've left behind. If we go to the audience section where we did that 4D profile and we're thinking about what we're going to be posting, YouTube, LinkedIn, what's our next post going to be? What's our next 10 posts going to be? Well, I might go into the desires, right? The looking at the desires of my target audience. Well, she wants a clear answer to the question, what do you do? That doesn't erase parts of her. So perhaps I need to make a post, a video or a written LinkedIn post on how you answer the question, what do you do, without erasing parts of yourself? Almost literally like lift and shift. Or how do you get comfortable with answering the questions, what do you do, when you have multiple passions and interests? Boom. That's one. So we're already at one. Now let's look at maybe another one of the desires before we move on. A non-linear career path that feels structured and intentional. Well, there's several ways we could approach this single idea. We could talk about how you plan in advance for a non-linear career path and position yourself to be palatable for both careers and maybe a business. But sticking on this same idea of non-linear career paths, we could dive into the portfolio career and talk about how you create structure and intentionality when you have multiple careers even at once. So we're still in this non-linear career path idea. Then we can talk about actually how you position yourself branding wise when you are balancing, maybe multiple streams of income or multiple career paths at once. In fact, I'm only going to count that as one, but that was 3 different ideas, okay, from that single line. When we think about it in different ways, that still serves what we want to talk about ultimately. Now let's look at one of the fears or the dreads, choosing the wrong path and getting stuck. So perhaps my next post needs to be about how to confidently choose a path when you have multiple passions and interests. That could be quite interesting. Okay, let's maybe look at one of the ones from descriptors. She values freedom and wants autonomy over how she works. Or how to structure your career in a way that builds freedom and autonomy in your life. Okay, so we've got another one, but let's move on a little bit because we're spending quite a lot of time here and it's getting obvious that there's a lot of rich ideas for us to post about that feeds our brand. So instead of maybe going with the struggles or what she wants, let's take a look at what she's tried. Maybe we can generate an idea from that. She's taken courses, polished her CV, LinkedIn, maybe even hired a coach, but it's all surface level. It doesn't address the identity shift. So maybe the video that I want to create is around the identity shift required to accept your non-linear career path, right? Or build a brand around your non-linear career. It's another one. We'll move on from the audience and let's go into key messaging right now. So if we picked one of these key messages, I'm going to go with non-linear doesn't mean unprofessional, it means modern. So if that's one of the key messages and I want to get through, then I actually might create a video or a post, like I said, on LinkedIn or a carousel that explores the ways that actually a non-linear career path can create an exceptional professional who has a number of skills that overlap and allows them to do unique work. That's another one. Or even in the case of my actual app, you can see there's an example. Portfolios careers aren't the trend, they're a response to how fast the world is changing. So now it's a different angle to the same messaging. The world is changing, right? Portfolio careers are becoming the norm. I don't even know what number we're on right now, but I'm actually gonna put a little counter to make sure, but I think we're on about 5 or 6. Now, if we look at maybe the content pillar, so maybe one of the more obvious places you might source this, let's take a look at freedom, lifestyle, and design. So we're still needing some ideas. This one says designing work around autonomy, moving away from rigid roles and execution, heavy work, building multiple streams of income. Okay, so maybe one of my ideas is obviously building multiple streams of income when you have multiple passions and interests, or how to build a role that you're uniquely placed for within your workplace. So going away from the rigid roles. Okay, now we're talking about crafting your own space. The audience connection section says that she wants more freedom, creativity, and impact. She's running away from rigid, unfulfilling careers. Right, so maybe we talk about how to inject creativity into your professional career while still creating impact. You guys can start to see how this, again, can keep going, and we can take the same idea and have different angles towards the same point, the same idea that is embedded in the blueprint, right? Now let's maybe talk about how you could get information out of your IP. Well, now if my IP is like my Renaissance formula, I'm thinking about videos or pieces of content that help support that or allow me to showcase this IP. For example, I might make a video about how to position yourself when you have multiple passions and interests, a formula for success. And now I'm going to share my formula in this particular video. But we still have some more, right? So because I started off with the audience, but we could go back up and now we're actually at the positioning, right? So what makes you different? So let's take a look at the specific gaps you address. The fact that personal branding is treated as content creation, not strategy, a body of work, and opportunities pipeline. So maybe the next post that I want to make is stop trying to be a content creator and start building a personal brand for real opportunities, right? Or maybe even one of the ones that I recently posted that I'll pop up here, right? You don't need to be on all these platforms. So now what I've shown you is specific, of course, to my program. It is built with quite a heavy backend and things like that. But if you want to build something like this yourself, what's going to be quite important is understanding the inputs that would be needed if you had Claude at hand, or if you had ChatGPT and you wanted to create your own maybe simplified version of this. Because the order and the depth does matter. Now, I don't have time to go through everything. This is like the 4-week part of my program. But let's talk about it at a high level, things that you need to consider and write down specifically. Start with your vision. Again, I'm not really an airy-fairy person. Sometimes it feels like the vision bit is airy-fairy. But if we don't know what we're working towards in terms of that work, development, and impact, how do I know how to build a brand to optimize for that? I don't. So we're going to start off with that and be as clear as possible and as expansive as you can be to get that information there. Then you're going to actually list your formula elements, right? There's a reason why those elements are there, and it's because it allows for your unique positioning. So list out your skills, like we said, your passion, the energy, and the values that you have. Now try to be as specific as possible, and if you can, even give examples and proof behind them. Then name your industries. What industries do you want to be a part of? Is it like the personal professional development, right? Is it fashion? Whatever the case is, think about those industries, because that's going to allow you to start to think about the gaps in those industries. What is missing, and therefore what is your uniquely placed to kind of fill, right? Like how you can start to think about what makes you different in those spaces. And so that's why it's worth taking the time out to think about. Then you want to map your audience. So sit down and think about the 4D profile of your audience, their demographics, their descriptors, their dreads, their desires. Think about that. And if you're speaking to a version of you, you just need to look back at what you wish you knew, right? In terms of the dreads or the fears that you had or the desires that you have or still do and are still working towards. Use that to build your profile. Note that down. And now with this richness of information, because there is quite a lot here if you do this extensively and the work behind and think about the prompts that you're using, you now have all of this data that you can use with something like ChatGPT or Claude to synthesize. This is what AI does really well and why we use AI in my particular app to synthesize the work that is done. So you can use that to help derive a formula that makes sense for the work that you want to do, the mission statement, the things that we spoke about, the pillars, because you have this wealth of information. So if you want to make a blueprint, if you want a source document, you need to think about the inputs that are going to allow you to achieve this. So I would say give it a go. Most people at this point know how to use ChatGPT or know how to use Claude, right, and go back and forth and get some sort of an output, right, in a document that serves you. Now, I know this seems like quite a lot of work, but just for one moment, think about you doing this upfront work and having this as a reference point, and then being able to use that for the next months, years, necessarily, as you update, but you have this grounding. Then it doesn't suddenly seem like so much work. Your return again on investment on upfront work is going to be seen time and time again. Now I'm going to stop yapping because I Probably could keep going on forever, but I wanted you to see the power of something like this, really. And speaking to the women in my program from the last cohort and how valuable even this was on its own, I thought it was good to share. If you want to do this in depth with me, get something out like you've seen today, use the app, use the variety of information and support, the one-to-ones, all that kind of work that we do, then definitely book a strategy call to see if you're right. If not, I'll see you in the next video.